Ladies and gentlemen, time passes by, right? I mean, my hair had gone gray. It seemed like yesterday I began this job, and then the millennium termed, and here we are a quarter way into this new century. It's already elapsed. So the next 4 years will also pass, and I promise you this. It's happening so fast that we're not comprehending it. Not you know, as we speak, India has probably already overtaken Germany as the fourth largest GDP in the world. Okay, that just leaves the US, Japan, and China. Okay, and Japan is not too far off. US and China are, of course, 3x or 4x further away. So these conversations, which were fundamentally important in New Delhi, all right. I remember when Obama was coming to India for the first time, and it was all we could talk about, right? Morning, evening, front pages, 24/7 live coverage. But when an Indian Prime Minister used to travel to the US, it would come on the 8th page that, an Indian PM was here. Not anymore. That's not only going to change, it has started changing. You remember even Joe Biden talking about how many people who wanted to show up to the White House reception that was being held for PM Modi. You've seen the Howdy Modi events and the New York events and all that, and that's just not the Indian diaspora. There's a overall general understanding that India and the US have to chart the course of the coming remaining 3/4 of a century together. We are living in that moment in history. So 4 years is a long time. So let me situate this right now in the American imagination, and not just the Trump administration imagination. In the American imagination, yeah, you're thinking, yeah, Ukraine, yeah, but what's India got to do with it, right? You're thinking Gaza, yeah, but what's India got to do with it, right? Panama, what's India got to do with it? So that's what you're thinking right now. But you've seen a gargantuan shift, and this is not just Trump, between the traditional all-weather alliance that transcended two world wars and the all of the previous century. The British Prime Minister was not there at the inaugural of the American president. One of the most virulent opposition leaders was in fact there. And this was supposed to be the special relationship which has been unbroken since the end of the Second World War. In fact, as Donald Trump and Narendra Modi were sitting, right behind Donald Trump was a bust of Winston Churchill. It's there in the White House, signifying that special relationship. So let me pick up that thought with Jordan Cope once again. Jordan, so I accept the fact that even in the American press tomorrow, this is going to be a footnote, right? This is not the biggest. This is not the biggest issue. It's not the biggest visit. Even in the press conferences, American journalists end up asking domestic policy questions of, for example, why has that particular attorney general resigned? Because that's the bigger news point for them. Modi being there is not the biggest news point. But that's going to change, and 4 years is a long time.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think the American psyche is not one that's so invested in foreign policy as much as it might be in much else of the rest of the world. If you looked at polling issues, one of the lowest voter agenda items was actually foreign policy. It wasn't the biggest role in this election, despite the fact that presidents ultimately determine what is the foreign policy of the United States, as does the federal branch of our government. So India also, though, if it wants to be a global leader, it needs to demonstrate global leading tendencies. And when I say that, I mean in the forefront of the halls of the United Nations, India often doesn't take very strong stances against the rest of the world, and it should definitely do so and exercise what it genuinely believes in. Of course, India is one of Israel's largest supporters behind the scenes, but when it comes to UN General Assembly resolutions, it doesn't necessarily take those strong stances out of fear of other political considerations. So, of course, India is rising in the ranks. Europe is definitely subsiding in terms of its place atop of the hierarchy in determining world order. And Americans need to pay better attention as to the role and the potential that India has. Americans are surely realizing it bit by bit, but India also at the same time needs to demonstrate leadership and strength when it comes to prioritizing its own foreign policy interests. And I would also argue separating itself from the actors that America doesn't necessarily get along with so well, including China and Russia.
Okay,
The latter of which
so
did
fair
become
enough. Americans need to be interested about what's happening in America. As you know, we are told all news is local, so we here are, of course, more interested in what's happening down the road than what's happening 18,000 miles away. But for sure, there is a larger global picture. The world is smaller than ever before. It is getting smaller. Globalization has not ended. It's in fact expanding at a scope that we've not seen before. Adrian, let me bring you into this conversation because life as we knew it, and as students, you know, studying international politics and history, it's been pretty much dominated by NATO and the Atlantic alliances between North America and Western Europe. I won't say that's over, you know, we are a long way from that, but it has diminished. It's different today, and it's not just because of Donald Trump. You can smell it in the air that it's different. The global priorities are changing. So while India might not be on the top of the priority list for Americans, when do you think that sort of dawns that hey, hang a second, India is a bigger economy than Germany? When did that happen?
Yeah, this is something I've been shouting from the rooftops for quite some time. You know, you have the United States over here, and Europe, the European Union, the UK. You talked about the special relationship. It's been in tatters for quite some time, and you're seeing a situation, at least from my perspective, where India is starting to play such a more pivotal role than Europe, which has been bogged down through the European Union. There's a lot of dysfunction within the European Union, corruption as well. It just hasn't functioned well, and India is the path for the future. I would like to get to the point where we have that special relationship with India, that you know, we see the same threats at the same level. We may not view it as impacting us, but India does, so we should care about it, such as Bangladesh. And at the same time, you know, Mexico may not be an issue for an illegal immigration for Indians, but it is for Americans, and India has.
Okay, so let me pick up on that thread with Dr. Rao. Dr. Rao, I remember Ambassador Jaishankar making this point that Europe thinks all of Europe's problems are the world's problems, but all the world's problems are not Europe problems, unquote. Now, in the past 18 months, we've had economic collapse and political instability in Sri Lanka, which is a near neighbor. We've had literally a coup take place in Bangladesh. There's no running away from that. That's what happened in Bangladesh. It wasn't a liberation, it was a coup. They're burning down the houses of their founding fathers as we speak. We have perpetual slide down into chaos in Pakistan. We've had a lot of issues that have taken place politically in South Korea, where difficult things have happened. Is this then a concern for Europe, or is Europe only concerned with itself?
See, Rishabh, for my entire life, I have noticed that Europe continued to have a slight colonial mindset, where they felt that they can decide on behalf of the southern part of the world. And throughout many of those years, India was leading the so-called non-aligned, saying that we are on neither side of the Cold War. And this led to a lot of suspicion, where US was more interested in supporting Pakistan and other nations which were not necessarily 100% democracy. And our democratic strength, representing 1/6 the world's population, was not being given the importance that the world's oldest democracy should have been giving. I think it is only now they are realizing that India is a very powerful democratic force with a lot of influence in the so-called southern part of the world. That means nearly half the population of the world can be influenced by India, and that India can be an important partner. It is not just the economic force. It's not just the technological advances that we have made in space, in various other technologies, and the fact that many of the US companies are now being headed by people of Indian origin. I think they are now beginning to realize that far more important in geopolitics and
Okay.
in representing the rest of the world,
Okay,
India is very
so let me
important for
ask them
them.
the larger, loaded, and difficult question. General Bansal, in a practical sense, if Europe is diminishing, and I'll use that word with measure, diminishing, and there cannot be any American special relationship with the Russians, at least in the near future, or with the Chinese in the near future, is it inevitable that the next global special relationship is between Washington and New Delhi, and are we desirous of one?
Very good question you have asked. Definitely, the Europe is diminishing. You know, when after this Ukraine-Russia war, they were having the problem with the gas supply and all. And very good question has been asked that you talked about the NATO earlier. So I would like to say one thing: the NATO was finished at the time when Americans they withdraw from Afghanistan. At that time, France told President Macron said that NATO is the brain dead. It was just revived because of this Ukraine-Russia war, and now there is as far as the European countries are concerned, there is a conflict. The European countries are divided even on the Ukraine issue also. Some of them are favoring Russia and they are divided. Now there's a lot of crisis over there, economic crisis there, there's energy crisis there. It is definitely on the diminishing side. And one of the countries that is the France is having good relations with India, and they realized that France has been supporter to us even during 1998 when we had this nuclear test. This work by our side. Now, as you have very rightly said, that relations between now the world is very practical now. The practical in the sense, President Trump says that yes, we must. Why should we spend for the money for security of Europe? Now, India is a power, economic power. It is coming up. It is a good market, and geopolitically, it is well placed. Keeping everything in mind, there is the good relations which is going to further reaching to the further heights between U.S. and India. And
the market difference that I've seen, and sitting here now many years later, I've done about 25,000 hours of television in what is actually a very short career, and watching this, and just as an observer, is how differently France approaches India than how the Germans, the British, the Canadians approach India. It's rather strange. And let me get Dr. Rao into this. Dr. Rao, we witness this real time because let's take example Stephen Sacker, a BBC journalist, roasting the former Chief Justice have done in the recent past.
Yes, I fully agree with you that interview with BBC interview with Chief Justice Chandrachud was very remarkable about how they continue to have a colonial mindset and they think that we are inferior in any way. The French have been very different from the rest of Europe. And if you remember, even till recently, the German foreign minister was busy promoting Pakistan and other nations and looking down upon India and giving us lectures on how to run a democracy. I think these things are changing. French, Israelis, and the Russians have actually been quite supportive of India and not been looking at India with a colonial mindset, unlike the other nations that you mentioned. I think the realization is coming on all their minds that India is now very quite powerful. It has got a lot of influence in a major part of the world, and we need to be treated as equals and not to be treated as something inferior. I think
I think in certain quarters the realization is totally absent. It just doesn't exist. It's the emperor's new clothes, right? You just don't want to see it because it's the truth is far more horrifying than living a lie. But yeah, that's the reality. The reality is this: we have a lot of problems here in India, ladies and gentlemen. But I have seen, and such remarkable change to witness is as a person living here and who's had the privilege of having spent time and studied abroad, seen the world for what it has, and see the change that India is around me happening. It's quite remarkable. Glad to be around at this time to actually see it happen. It's truly remarkable. But putting that aside, there is the world doesn't necessarily run on hopes and dreams. It runs on reality, realpolitik. What is the situation at hand and what matters? Let me put that perspective into place. Dr. Sadhguru Nagao, all in good, right? India is rising very good. We knew that 5 years ago. It's a certainty 5 years from now. But what leverage does India have in other parts of the world? I have seen our diplomacy change. I've seen us give away free vaccines. I've seen us give away aid to places like Sri Lanka and others like never before. We have $700 billion in foreign exchange reserves. When I was in school, that was less than $100 billion. So things have changed. But what leverage does that actually give us?
When we talk about the potential of India, we should not only the power of India. We should not talk about only the India as a nation, because the Indian people contribute in the global stage. For example, in the United States, or for example, the British, there are plenty of the Indian contribute the technological sector or related with law or the doctors. Everyone are Indian. So that's why, indeed, Indians are moving world. So in case of India's policy, India itself is rising just now, but potential of India is more greater, I think. So that's why how to connect Indian abroad and Indian in India is the key for rising India.
Okay, but Dr. Nagao, let me just for point of context, while waiting the press conference to start, a lot of naysayers will say that, okay, India is growing fine, world's fastest major economy, but that's 6.5%, 7%, right? The Chinese were doing 15, 16% a year for 2 decades. That's what's actually required, and that's not happening in India. So can the Indian story be different?
Is it to
Dr.
me?
Nagao.
Okay. Yes, of course. Currently, the way check country-based country, these are the data. So GDP, the India's GDP, American GDP, but Indian contributes American GDP, Indian contributes UK GDP. This is really. For example, we talk about AI recently because of the big event. But who developed AI? Indian. Many Indian contributed. So when we check the resources, human resources, who can develop AI, indeed India's resources is #1 in the world. So when we check the power of India, if the India connect the domestic power and global power, indeed India will be #1 relatively easily. So that's why how to calculate India's potential, it is not easy to calculate, but indeed very big, and India has already been global #1 in this case.
Okay.
But at the same time, how to connect is maybe policy matter. That is another problem.
Okay, all right. Okay, the joint statement is about to happen very shortly. Let me get General Bansal back into this conversation. Sir, in a very practical matter, what are we expecting in terms of announcements?
You know, in terms of announcement, there will be a great progress towards the defense procurement. In the trade also, it will energy, that yes, India will buy fuel from America, and of course immigration issue may be there, and there was something was going on that in the joint statement about the Khalistani and terrorism, whatever is going on around the world. So these are the main things which are going to surface, because basically trade, technology, and maybe this the artificial intelligence may be one of the things which will come out of it. So there are certain issues which will be very will be brought out in this particular joint statement, specifically concerning with the world order, terrorism, this Islamic Jihad. So these are the common issues which this U.S. and India is facing. Back to
Okay,
you.
all right. What you're expecting is, of course, a very carefully crafted joint statement means that both sides agree upon it, which means that both the teams have sat down and gone through every word and every line very, very carefully, which will include what the Americans want focused on in the joint statement and what we as Indians want focused in the joint statement. Those will not always be the same. There's going to be a confluence of interest, but obviously the Trump priorities are: number one, can I come away from this and go back to the people in America and say, hey, when it came to tariffs, we got the Indians on the negotiating table and they've made way. When it came to investments into the US, we've got these many billions. It might be a defense deal. It might be, last time around, remember, it was aircraft, when Indian companies ordered 500 aircrafts globally. And imagine the thousands of jobs that safeguards or creates in the United States of America. So we've seen that happen. For sure, a defense deal is in the brooking here. You've just heard General Bansal mention energy. Everybody in the world right now is talking about AI. So now whether that will be a token entry into the books or whether something substantive will come out of this, technology transfer, big deal for India. Okay. Immigration and return of the illegal migrants, big deal for Trump. So you're going to see all of that conversation take place. There will be certain things the Americans will highlight more, certain things the Indian team will highlight more. For sure, you'll see a press conference, probably by the foreign ministers or foreign secretaries, very, very shortly, where they'll be talking about what they felt this went. But let's be clear on what this is about. This is about us in India understanding that Donald Trump, in the first month of his presidency, has an agenda, okay, and we want to work with him. Therefore, there are issue points which we have to address in a pragmatic way. An association which is a happy association with America is better prospects for both America and India than an unhappy association. And I promise you, no matter how we spin it, not like the Biden administration had only pitfalls in the India-US relationship, that's not true. But no matter how you spin it, the last few months of the Biden administration saw certain actors in America directly assault India in ways which are unfathomable to people like us. Why would you want to be supporting Khalistanis openly in the US? It is akin to us in India supporting the Irish Republican Army, or us in India supporting the freedom of Quebec from Canada. It's ridiculous, but it happens, and it happened. George Soros is very open about regime change in India, and he was just given the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, their highest civilian honor. So let's not kid ourselves. There was a lot of unpleasantness. So for all those who will think, no, this is India bending over backwards, no. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we would have stopped buying oil from Russia. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we would have never bought oil from Iran. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we wouldn't have sorted out the issues which we've had on the border with China. India has to worry about itself first, its people first. It is in Indian interest to have a strong association with America and a strong association with Donald Trump. Now, having said that, while we're waiting for a press conference, let me get Dr. Rao back in. Dr. Rao, I'm going to circle back because thankfully these are issues of the past. I'm hoping that they remain issues of the past. But for some reason, the last 1 year was Justin Trudeau running rampant across global affairs, bearing cudgels, accusing the Indian administration of doing state-sponsored assassinations. I don't want to go into the Bay of Pigs and assassinations of Iranians and what happens in Abu Dhabi and other places, let alone what the Israeli state does. But this is what was being pictured. Khalistanis who want the Indian state to be broken into pieces, being openly feted in the UK, in Canada, and even in the US. Indian consulates in San Francisco being attacked. Unpleasant things were happening as well, sir.
Yes, this is what I feel. It was in the larger sense when I said a colonial mindset. They felt that they were, if Indian leaders were not willing to listen to what they wanted, then they were quite justified in giving a different leadership to not only India, to many other countries, which they felt is superior to what existed, just because the existing leadership was not listening to them. And this is why not only the Khalistanis, but various other such anti-India groups, both outside India and inside India, were being encouraged by them. And it is high time that this deep state, which is now being exposed after the US aid has been shut down, I hope the present new administration takes a better view about it, because everywhere where they have produced regime change, they have only caused a big mess up. They should be in pro-democracy. They call themselves the oldest democracy. They always claim to be a force for democracy. They should be able to identify and support true democracies.
Okay. All right.
That is what I feel. And one other point, I feel now is a time when India, which is dependent on various high-tech stuff from China, and that's why we have a trade deficit with China, I think we should switch that to import it from US, like many of the medical equipments and various other high-tech stuff.
Yeah,
and
tough one.
Thus,
tough one. Trust me, nobody really wants to be importing from China. Okay, but you got to give the devil its due. The Chinese are providing equipment which far exceeds the cost parity parameters that anybody else can do right now. Now, that doesn't mean it won't change. That doesn't mean the iPhones can't be built in India because they are, okay. But there's also a truism that the chips that are put in those iPhones come from either Taiwan, the screens come from Korea, so they only get assembled here. So there's a reality to the world as well. But I'll tell you an example of hypocritical goat getting, okay. Donald Trump, until 6 months ago, was the principal leader of the opposition, how we would describe it in a parliamentary style of democracy, right? He was the tallest figure in the opposition party, and he had case after case after case after case at him. He was facing arrest, he was facing prosecution on all sorts of cases. Now, when in America the tallest opposition leader and a former president is facing cases, it's a democracy. But if in India an opposition leader faces cases, it's the crushing of democracy. It's hypocritical to the core. It's almost laughable that it's like Justin Trudeau imposing an emergency in Canada, freezing the bank accounts of protesting truckers, then coming to India and talking about liberty and freedom of speech. This is the hypocritical nonsense that becomes way too much, and there's a problem there. But beyond that, there is a reality picture, and let me get that with General Bansal. General Bansal, okay, so if we assume that Donald Trump wants A, investments, B, the ability to talk about job creation in the US, C, big ticket defense deals and commercial deals, D, on immigration, maybe a little bit on AI, what do we want? I am assuming number one is technology transfer and number two is the war on terror. Is there anything else?
Technology transfer is the main thing, and of course terrorism, and this specifically Khalistani issue. The Pannu who is sitting over there, and he is working against India. That kind of thing has to be ended. Moreover, of course, there is the technology transfer, and specifically the high technology AI chips, etc. India will be expecting, and immigration and HB1 visa. That is also one of the issue. That yes, if the immigration, they are talking about the illegal immigration which India is ready to take back, but at the same time this HB1 visa has to be there should not be any cut in that, because as such the complete IT industry of US is based on the Indian workers who are working there. And if America does not do that, in that case, these days there are the proposal going on offshore working of operation, maybe in the same time zone in Canada or maybe Latin America, where the company will whom the companies in the US will do in that manner. And as such, some of the work operation is being done from India itself for the US. So it is in the US interest to have the HB1 visa for the Indian
Okay.
people, so that their
Okay, so we have a clear cleaving of the two issues. Illegal immigration, fair enough. Okay, if there are illegal immigrants who are being arrested as criminals in the US and they're being deported to their country of origin or citizenship, fair enough. But that should not have a bearing, prima facie, on legal immigration. That makes no sense for the United States to have create a problem in the H1B visa system. It makes no sense for India to want to see the United States create a problem. So a cleaving of those two, bifurcation, a disaggregation of those two is required for sure. Technology transfer, General Bansal, is the next thing, and I want to hold on to this thought with you for a second. Because we've never bought American frontline fighter jets, we might about to be, if not today, very shortly. And if that is the assumption, technology transfer is going to be core to that.
Yeah, because as it is in the interest of US to transfer
Okay, I'm sorry to
technology.
interrupt you, sir. The joint statement has begun. Let's go live.